Good evening, everybody. Thank you for making this Monday your evening. As always, OPMA is thrilled to have you. This is, of course, the December program for us, and we're enormously delighted to have Peter Wilenius with us from Canary, and we'll get into that in a second. It's Christmas, right? So all the reason in the world to be joyful and happy. And we are just that. In the past year, we've had some pretty significant successes. The organization is now almost at 800 members, which is pretty amazing. Like any organization, there are fees that we incur as a result of doing what we do. And so I want to thank very generously the following companies for their tremendous support, which include Bitheads, of course, who provide the facility for us, Caseware, who helped us, of course, again this year with our product camp, Tangentia, Pragmatic Marketing, Fluid Surveys, 360, Halogen, and of course Ross Video. Where's Jeff? So thanks to Jeff over there. Have I missed anybody? No, good. So a couple new sponsors, Tangentia and Halogen Software. So Tangentia is a leading boutique consulting, technology, and outsourcing firm, and Halogen, everybody knows who they are, right? Talent management software, customized solutions and such. Anybody not know any of those companies? Okay. Well, we're thrilled that they're part of us, and we're here to promote them. So they're going to work with us a little bit if they have needs for product managers or people in the technology field or communications field where they need assistance. So good thing to take a look at their websites. And what we're about. So essentially we have 4 pillars. Leadership in product management, which we're trying to foster by creating a best practices environment, as well as our mentorship program, which started up this year, and we're thrilled. We have a number of people who are being mentored now, and spots for people who both want to be mentored as well as mentees. Obviously, networking is a key part of it, an environment where people who are in this field have an opportunity to come together and get to know one another and possibly share issues and situations that might help them be more effective and efficient in their business. And lastly, education. So we have a director of education, like all of these other pillars, whose role it is to not only look at various tools, but put together programs that help the organization from an educational perspective. And I use this as a reason why education is so critically important to OPMA. And we think of project management. They have an international program which is fostered by industry. You can get your PMA. I happen to have my master's in project management. And the reality is that there's all kinds of tools and solutions and such like that allow project managers to be successful, including Microsoft project manager, what is it called? No, just project. And yet when you think of the world of product management, there's very few tools that are obvious and ubiquitous, if you will, available for everybody. And so I think that that's one of the areas that I think are very important to OPMA to try and be part of long term. I would next like to introduce our guest speaker. It's kind of interesting because while I've heard Peter's name for years, because he was a very key person at March Networks. He's been involved in the Wesley Clover organization for a long time, Newbridge and such like. We just haven't crossed paths, but it's kind of funny because I would hear about him all the time. And he's now at Canary and heading up their business group, and he'll be a little bit more precise in what he does. But I can tell you that what Canary does as an organization has been on my radar for 21 years, I guess they've been around. Let's welcome Peter Wilenius, please.
Thanks, Mark. Evening, folks. Yeah, Canary's probably the longest, oldest technology company that most people have never heard of in Canada. And quite frankly, I had heard of it about 5 years ago, but really wasn't really sure what it did. Just quick show of hands, how many people are familiar with Canary? Wow. You guys would win the prize in almost anybody I would talk to. which is kind of impressive. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Canary, so I won't talk as much since you guys pretty much know. And really want to talk about what we do, why we do it, how we do it, and kind of what we see as our role going forward and what that means for folks in this room in terms of strategy and what's going on in the ICT space. Canary's role is really to advance the digital economy, to drive the adoption of networking, computing, and software technologies, to spur innovation and collaboration, whether that's in the academic research sector, government research, or in the private sector increasingly. And I'll spend a little bit more time talking about the private sector element in a while. And really driving adoption of transformative technologies so we can evolve Canada's digital economy, compete globally, raise the standard of living and productivity, and ensure that all Canadians can benefit from a vibrant knowledge economy. We're a not-for-profit. The organization, as Mark said, is 21 years old. It's funded predominantly by Industry Canada to the tune of about $20 million a year. And really we do a bunch of things. We run the National Research and Education Network, which is a backbone network that connects provincial research and education networks, which ultimately connect to anywhere research is done. Universities, hospitals, government labs, and increasingly the private sector. So as most of you would know, research is becoming data-driven. The research that gets done today is connected to sensors, it's very collaborative, it's highly data intensive, and commercial internet connections or even dedicated networks cannot support the amount of data that's required for researchers to do their work. For example, the CERN Super Collider in Switzerland, the Large Hadron Collider, the Atlas detector, all the data that comes out of that transits the Canary network with our international partners and comes back, goes across Canada, across the backbone to Triumph, where particle physicists do the work required to identify 2 years ago the Higgs boson. That's one example. There's just literally hundreds of examples of research is becoming extremely data intensive, scientific research as well as social sciences and humanities. Any field that does analysis and innovation requires data, and data is the first element in the chain to turn into information, to create knowledge and insights, and hopefully to develop innovation and either economic or social well-being. So, I mean, really we're funded by Industry Canada because they look at us as kind of an arm of implementing government policy. Though we are arm's length, they see us as kind of experts in the field of ICT. We've been at this a long time, and they trust what we, if they have issues they want to understand, new technology trends, or they want to understand how we can support the deployment of ICT and the growth of the ICT industry in Canada, generally Industry Canada looks to us. So we're kind of that nexus between the academic research community, the private sector, and government policy. And really we've over this 20-year period, we've been laying the foundation for a lot of things. We built the first internet backbone in Canada more than 20 years ago, transitioned that over to Bell. We founded and hosted, incubated the Canadian Internet Registration Authority, spun it out as a separate entity, and today I think there are 2 million and growing domains across Canada. The internet wouldn't function without something like CIRA. We're really about research and innovation, not about production and commercial offering. So it got to the point where if you were going to run an internet backbone in Canada, you needed a commercial provider to manage it. And so that's generally what we do. We get it to a certain point, we incubate it, we fill gaps in the ecosystem, and then we find somebody like a commercial provider to run that. Same thing with CIRA, for example. In the early days of Canary, we also piloted a large number of internet backbone applications, advancing new optical technologies that got deployed in the network. At one point, we had the world's fastest production fiber network. There are others in the community that have passed this, but we continue to evolve those technologies and think of, particularly in terms of ICT technologies, think of Canary as kind of a test bed, and NRENs in general, National Research and Education Networks, are early adopters of technologies, proving them because they have an interest in innovation, because they have requirements that push the edge of where network technology is going, the amount of data, the speeds required, those sorts of things. And we continue to do that. We piloted early telemedicine applications, e-health, digital learning. These are the kinds of things that are now coming mainstream, and the role of Canary and other NRENs is to move those things along, kind of a pre-commercialization to ensure that they do get moved along and eventually commercialized and benefit in Canada. Should mention just some quick stats. I think the backbone now stretches 21,000 kilometers. The data traffic this year will be roughly 100 petabytes. That's growing somewhere between 40 and 50% year over year. So in some cases, it's actually surpassing general data growth. 2 years ago, I think data traffic grew 80%, and that was one of the years when the LHC was up and running. It's down for maintenance right now. When it comes back on, the resolution of the detectors again spur that up. Things like, has anybody ever heard of the square kilometer array? So a massive installation of radio telescopes crossing southern Africa and Australia. The effective area of, I think, I can't remember how many of these dishes there are, but is 1 square kilometer. It'll be the world's most powerful radio telescope, and I think even the cleaned up, compressed output of that will be something on the order of 5 gigabits per second. So that'll dwarf what the Atlas detector is doing today. So we're just starting to see, there's more sensors getting connected to the network. The resolution of these things is getting more. The amount of uptime they have is just increasing, and that's why we're seeing the amount of data that gets driven across the network. So that's kind of the foundational layer. We run the network. We support collaboration across Canada and into the international community. So I mentioned the term NREN. There is an NREN in pretty much any G20 or even beyond country that you can think of. And these all interconnect into this global network that allows research to get done on a global and collaborative basis. So really what we're about, as I said, is trying to move Canada into the digital age, which is a bit of a shift from where we started. Everybody knows historically, Canada has had a tremendous standard of living, high GDP per capita, an economy that was built in the 1800s on agriculture, forestry, fishing. Into the 1900s, the same thing. In the last 50 years, manufacturing has been strong. Mark and I were talking a little earlier about the decline of manufacturing in Canada. Really, though, the economy today in Canada is about either services, financial services and healthcare, education, or minerals and oil extraction. It's very much a resource-dependent economy, and our role is to try and create a little bit more balance in growing the ICT community and the ICT industry in Canada, and to get more traditional industries to adopt ICT technologies to improve competitiveness. So one of the things that's a threat to Canada's economic competitiveness is lagging productivity. That's been an issue for probably 30 or 40 years. Now there's some issues and questions about do we measure it appropriately, but the fact is we're not as competitive as we used to be. There are threats from emerging countries that could easily surpass Canada's position in the G7. Lagging R&D investment by the private sector, the ICT industry stagnant. Anybody who's been in this industry long enough has seen the sale or dismantling of a number of players. Nortel's gone, BlackBerry's struggling. A lot of the companies that I've worked with in the past have been acquired. And there really aren't companies emerging to fill that void. The good news is that there are tons of very small SMEs with great ideas, but we don't have the critical mass yet to grow the next Nortel or the next BlackBerry. And really that's what we're interested in helping. And for a country that is as connected as Canada is, I think we have 90% penetration of internet access in Canadian households. We're one of the most connected countries on the planet. You could argue very, very low data rates, but our private sector is very slow to adopt internet technologies. And really that's, it's a major threat, and it's also a massive opportunity. The internet economy has been, it's staggering the amount of growth we've seen it's roughly 40 years since ARPA demonstrated the first network and began the foundations of internet technology. Most of it has accelerated in the past 15 to 20 years. You see that stat, 3 billion users by 2016. I think it was about 6 years ago there were 2 billion. So we're doubling in a period of growing by 50% in a period of 6 or 7 years. The contribution, $4.2 trillion from G20 countries in the internet economy. That's 4.1% of GDP for an economic sector that didn't exist really 25 years ago. It's just staggering the pervasiveness and the impact this has had. And this last stat is the one that really got my attention. If the internet as a sector was a country, it would rank 5th in terms of global output, only behind those 4 countries. So bigger than Germany. You can probably argue in the next 15 or 20 years, it'll surpass all of them. The way this technology is growing, it's truly astounding, and it's driving a ton of change. Over the last 5 years, this is a McKinsey study, so I think the period was actually 2008 through 2012. It accounted for 21% of GDP. So right through a major economic meltdown when everything else was going the other way, this continued to grow. 2.6 jobs created for every one lost. So a lot of people say, innovation and ICT is going to lose jobs. Well, for every job lost, 2.6 are created. 75% of the impact is on traditional industries, and this is what Canada has to realize, is that there's tremendous potential to increase productivity by developing and applying technologies to our traditional industries, getting better at identifying resource deposits, getting better in productivity and utilization of raw materials. The amount of opportunity is amazing. And particularly, again, for SMEs. So I think this is a BCG study, Boston Consulting Group. They looked over a number of countries and compared businesses who were low users of internet technologies, they might have a website, to more moderate, they may do some e-commerce, to more advanced ones had full-blown CRM systems and were doing data mining. And the difference in the growth rates over 5 years in pretty much every country, from the low adopter to the high adopter, was 20% over 5 years, which is astounding. And really this whole trend has created some amazing global brands that we couldn't have even imagined existed just 10 years ago. I mean, I think Google's actually 15 years old, but really is only about 10, 12 years old. Facebook, same thing. Amazon has gone from a bookseller to a global technology services provider. And what's interesting to me, when I first saw this chart, I was really astounded. And that's average revenue per employee. And you go up the stack from IT services and electronic components and kind of core telecom equipment and semiconductors. And in past lives, we would think that $200,000 to $400,000 per employee was the benchmark of a very healthy company. Well, these guys are at $900,000 per employee and growing. So it speaks to a couple of things: the ability to scale, get global reach using these technologies. It speaks to the ability to take the data that's being aggregated around the planet and turn that into a monetizable service. So these are very profitable global businesses that have been built in a very short time frame, leveraging telecom, computing, software, analytics, and turning data into a resource. And I said earlier, Canada's losing ground. This is Canada's position. I know it's an eye chart, it's hard to see, but this is Canada's position. It measures percent of GDP from the internet economy out of total GDP. Canada's kind of quagmired in the 3 to 4%, and we're losing ground. Whereas economies like the UK, South Korea, and China are kind of leading the pack. So the kind of the message here is if we don't start picking things up, we could end up being surpassed by a number of developing countries. Mark.
What's the UK doing?
That was interesting. It kind of caught me by surprise, and we were in actually an all-staff meeting last week, and our CEO had presented at the CRCC hearings, and they were talking about wholesale kind of backbone services. And one of our guys who was a Brit said, we did this 10 years ago. And that was really it, is that bandwidth is plentiful, it's available everywhere. It is a relatively small country, right? So, I mean, there's part of the challenge, but they've stepped up, right? So, I mean, a lot of that is e-commerce, but they have a heavy investment in the software industry and services that leverage that infrastructure. South Korea, the same thing. China's going to be scary, right? If they keep that up, it's going to be a challenge. So Canada's actually identified, the green are digital natives, so these are the ones who've kind of harnessed it and run with it. Canada's identified as a player. Well, I didn't put the chart up that actually shows that Canada's probably on the verge of falling out of the player aspect into kind of the laggard. So that's really kind of what keeps us awake at night. So I just want to run through this quickly. These are really the mega trends that are driving everything. And really, if you're talking about product strategy and where to place bets, these are really the key drivers in what's going on. 500 million mobile devices are added every year. So those are platforms for doing e-commerce. Those are platforms for consuming services. It's untethering the network. It's providing access to populations anywhere in the world. So a lot of developing countries, people have never even used a laptop or a desktop, and they don't have a broadband connection, a wired broadband connection. They have a mobile connection. So all this is doing is, the power of these things is extending the amount of computing power in your hand. It's giving you an opportunity to consume an incredible array of services, and it's extending the size of the market on an exponential rate. And that's why we're adding 500 million a year. So the number of mobile devices, I believe, now outnumbers the number of people on the planet, which is pretty impressive. Social media, obviously, is a phenomenon that we've all seen over the last 15 years. And this really isn't about the Facebooks and the Pinterests of the world and offering a chat room. This is really about the amount of data that these sites are generating and the amount of insight that that's driving for the people who are monetizing these channels. So, I mean, you saw on the previous slide about average revenue per employee. This is really what it's all about, is the amount of data is being turned from a raw resource into something that's a new product and service that can be monetized and create a tremendous amount of profit. Next thing up is the IoT, Internet of Things. People call this the next industrial revolution. Everybody's probably seen Cisco's forecast of 50 billion connected devices in 2020. There are others who say that could be dwarfed. But the reality is that the combination of network sensors and analytic software technology has the promise to create an industrial revolution that could revitalize a number of traditional economic sectors. And that's why you see things like internet technology being able to address 75% of the applications are in traditional industries. So whether it's wearable technologies in healthcare, or whether it's things in agriculture or transportation, this is kind of really where things are going. And I think probably creates the biggest single opportunity for new applications and new revenue streams. And all that's creating big data. So it's astounding, and I can't remember the stat, but something about the amount of information that had been collected and produced in the entire history of mankind up to about 5 years ago was surpassed very quickly within about the next 5 years, and it's doubling at a tremendous rate. And here's this one is kind of interesting. So the stat the phrase is information is the oil of the 21st century. That's been a term that's been around for a long time. But the real relevant piece is analytics is the new combustion engine. Because there's so much data being generated, a lot of it isn't really of value. It's how you get to the information that's of value. How do you turn that into information and knowledge and insights and create a service out of it? So analytics, whether it's analytics software applications or whether it's investment in people, data scientists is really what's going to drive economic growth going forward. So the stat is that in 2013, the amount of data created was 4.4 zettabytes, which is a kind of a crazy number. I don't think anybody ever knew what a zettabyte was. And if you stacked a bunch of iPads together, they would reach 2/3 of the way to the moon. Well, by 2020, that'll be 44 zettabytes, and it will go 6.5 times there and back. So it's just a tremendous amount of data. It can't all be stored. It has to be filtered. But finding things of value is kind of really going to be the challenge. I'll quickly step over this. We've talked about this. This is kind of really the next industrial revolution. And pretty much anything you can think about sensorizing anywhere in the planet will be available as information. And that's really the opportunity. And it's really about improving decision-making or automating decision-making, providing better customer insights, developing new products and services, or improving the efficiency and the productivity of operations. And again, for Canada, that's what we think is important. And across a number of potential sectors. So again, this is a McKinsey Global Institute study just capturing the value of internet technologies on specific sectors of the economy, and absolutely staggering numbers. Healthcare is probably a kind of well understood one. Retail is pretty obvious. But things like manufacturing. And one that's interesting and is just emerging is the concept of open data. So governments around the world, Canada included, have recognized that they have massive amounts of data stores that could be turned into valuable information. We've all, as taxpayers, paid for this, so Canada is one of the leaders in trying to push for an open data world where that data is freely available to anybody who wants to access it and create applications. And when you think about government data, maybe you scratch your head, but anybody have a guess what the value of data from the Environment Canada or the National Weather Service in the US is worth? It's $1.5 billion industry already, just for reporting weather, right? And just think about how you can then turn that into analytics for agriculture or transportation or whatever. And so this is probably going to be one of the next ways we'll see a lot of talk about open data in Canada. I've seen a forecast that it's something on the order of $3 trillion globally. There are a few politicians in the current government that are very keen on this concept as a way of unlocking value and returning taxpayer investments back to the public and creating opportunities. Canada sponsored an open data hackathon last year through the Treasury Board, I believe, and I think they had something on the order of 130 applications. They expected maybe 15 or 20. They had a one-weekend hackathon and got well over 100 applications. So I think we'll start to see a lot more about open data and a lot more about platforms and analytics that support the ability to turn open data into usable applications. And kind of really, this is what it's all about in terms of private sector strategy. This is a Harvard Business Review study. Companies that are in the top third of their category in terms of the use of internet technologies are 5% more productive and 6% more profitable than their competitors. And that's really the difference between living and dying in some industries, and is proof point for why we need to invest in data-driven innovation and analytics. So what is Canary doing about this? We talked about some of the past. Let's talk about the present. So we mentioned the network. We move an increasing amount of data. We have 1 million people who use the network on a daily basis, 1,100 institutions connected, enabling collaboration around the globe. connecting people to people, connecting people to machines, enabling some of the innovations that we talked about. But we see the ability to evolve and innovate technology on top of the core network. It's not just about moving bits. So in our past mandate, we funded something on the order of $40 million in software development, so enabling researchers to develop platforms to do the analysis on the data so that they can develop the insights they needed. And probably one of the most successful things that we funded was something called CBrain, led by a guy by the name of Alan Evans out of McGill. And CBrain, and essentially what he did is they created this massive brain imaging application where I could be sitting in Vancouver and he could be sitting in McGill, and we could be looking at somebody's brain and analyzing and understanding neurological issues. They then took essentially a micron level meat slicer and sliced a brain in 7,000 slices. They digitized it all, and they created an atlas of the brain that's available to anybody on the globe. And it's, a staggering amount of data. But Dr. Evans was awarded an MIT award last year for one of the top 10 most promising technological developments in the world. And we were very proud to have supported that. So he built the CBrain software platform with funding from Canary. So we did about 30 or 40 of these things, and about $1 million a pop, from astronomy to particle physics, to environmental technologies, to sensors, to tsunami detectors. And we were realizing that at the end of the day, we were funding some fairly standard stuff over and over again. There's data acquisition, there's normalization, there's visualization, there's storage, there's security. And so we kind of turned the program on its head. And basically what we've done is created a big data open source community for researchers, where we fund the researchers to build their platforms but then contribute back services into it. So we're growing this repository of web services for creating research platforms. We see this as advancing the ability for the research community to develop best practices in writing software, to developing some really good analytic tools that can propagate throughout the community. And we see ultimately these kinds of tools getting moved into the private sector as well. In the beginning of this current mandate, so the mandate runs through March of next year, Industry Canada asked us to think about how we could help the ICT industry in Canada evolve, and they saw the problems that Nortel was experiencing. They saw the lack of R&D investment that we talked about. They saw that the fact that the SME sector really wasn't getting any bigger, and they asked us for ideas, and we saw cloud computing as not only a transformative technology, but one that was significantly underpenetrated in this country. So we built a cloud. We've got 2 nodes in Sherbrooke, Quebec, and Edmonton, Alberta, and we give SMEs access to it for free. They get 4 VMs. They get a bunch of storage. They can do product development and testing. They can test at scale. The data stays on the Canary network. The cloud in Canada. There are no issues around data sovereignty and the Patriot Act. They can do customer pilots and trials. So we launched it 2 years ago next month, and we've had, I think to date, about 320 SMEs who've built new applications on it. We've started to see, they get 1 year on it. They can buy additional resource if they want. Yes, Mark? That's a great question, and I'm glad I planted that with you. No, I didn't. The 2 I just talked about, research software and the DARE program, NRENs around the world are asking, how did you guys do this? Because most NRENs are really about research and education and the innovation piece. We're thinking a little broadly and a little further out there. And I want to attribute it to the background of a lot of the people that we have. A lot of us in the leadership team have private sector experience. The CTO and the CEO are both ex-Newbridge guys. ran big divisions, had previously been at Mitel, been at Meriton, Saba, seen the kind of the evolution of technologies and understood kind of what was needed to move things along. So, I think we're kind of leading the charge there. A lot of people are working on let's build faster, bigger networks. We're thinking about how can we use it more effectively. So DARE program, 320 some users, and we're really seeing good success in they obviously save money into SMEs with limited funding. That's very important. 85% of the users are 1 to 9 employees. I think most of that 85% are actually maybe 1 to 3 employees, may not have any funding. They use this as a means to prove an idea, to get a prototype, minimum viable prototype, to do some demonstrations, maybe get some seed funding, move it to the next level. And that's what we're trying to do, is move them from that idea phase through the commercialization continuum. And I should mention that we intend at the end of the year that they move off onto commercial infrastructure. We don't want to take taxpayer money and start competing. We want to start providing the impetus for people to adopt what we think is a transformative technology, which provides the ability for anybody in Canada to compete on a global basis and sell products or services anywhere in the world. And cloud is the way that you do this. And you saw, for example, the growth rates and the average revenue per employee of folks like Facebook and Amazon and Google. Well, that's leveraging cloud and a lot of those other megatrends that we talked about. So the DARE program is we really see it as we're leveraging an existing asset that the people of Canada have paid for. It's $500 million investment to date. And we're leveraging it basically no cost, no incremental cost. Accelerating time to market. We did a survey of users and they've told us that they accelerated their time to market by 20 weeks, which again makes me think that these are people who were probably not going to find a way to take this product idea any further. That being said, we have 500-person companies using DARE as well, but we're seeing an interesting number of applications coming out of this, from cybersecurity applications, wearable technologies, media monitoring, gaming. It's pretty much, there was no specific focus. We just said it's kind of an open sandbox. Come and use it, prove your technology, hopefully move it to commercialization. And we're starting to see some good examples of people actually taking the resource, leveraging it, and doing licensing deals because they're able to prove. We have one company called Galdos, and I can't even remember what their application was. It's something to do with the travel industry, and Expedia was very interested in licensing the technology, but okay, we have tens of thousands of daily users. You need to prove to me that this thing works at scale. They were able to set up an architecture between Sherbrooke and Edmonton. They could simulate a large amount of traffic over the Canary network and prove that this thing was able to support tens or hundreds of thousands of users, and that got them a licensing deal. So we're starting to see the fruits of our labors, and really looking forward to the next 5 years when we start to grow this program. Talked about software for researchers, so it's really about making the hardware, the network, the advanced computing, the data storage pieces work better by making it all software controlled. That's the way the technology base is going. And that kind of brings me to the last one thing I wanted to talk about with Canary. We were a partner with a Center of Excellence called Center of Excellence for Next Generation Networks. Was recently funded in Ottawa. A lot of hard work was done by the folks of Invest Ottawa, who were working with the large local players like Cisco and Alcatel and Juniper, but as well a number of SMEs like BTI, and hopefully more to come, who saw that they were thinking without their corporate product hats on. They were thinking as citizens of Ottawa and Canada, saying, okay, we've got these challenges in industry. How do we reinvigorate what's going on here? We need something to spur the technology space, particularly in Ottawa. And this is a partnership between 13 founding private sector partners, a number of academic partners like Carleton and Ottawa U, University of Toronto, University of Calgary, to develop a test bed that supports software-defined networking, network function virtualization, and cloud computing evolution of and commercialization of new technologies. We provide the underlying connectivity to connect, say, Cisco with an SME partner, with an academic researcher in Calgary, to prove a concept, to do test and evaluation of it, and move it along the scale to commercialization. It was really interesting, as some of the folks at Invest Ottawa said, when they had the first meeting, they had the Cisco and Alcatel and Juniper guys and a bunch of other guys in a room and started talking about the opportunity to create something that was truly a center of excellence for Canada within Ottawa. And they asked them, when was the last time you guys were in a room together? And the answer was never. And that really speaks to the power of this thing. So it's a multi-vendor test bed. It virtualizes all the Cisco gear, the Juniper gear, the Alcatel gear. JDS is a partner. Exfo out of Montreal is a partner. We hope that folks like Ericsson and Ciena will be. And most importantly, folks like Allstream and Rogers and TELUS are charter members because they see the value of proving these emerging technologies in something that's close to a production network. So each of the Tier 1 members is putting up $250,000 a year to participate in this. We've got 13 charter members already. It was launched just in November. You'll see an RFP come on the street probably in the next 30 to 60 days looking for proposals for funding. So SMEs can apply for funding to get commercialization support, to get support from the center itself in implementing a test bed and proving their technologies out at no charge to the SMEs. Why would players? Well, they do have kind of Ottawa-centric roots, and they want to see this economy thrive. But they also have their corporate hats on, and they see the ability to get line of sight to emerging technologies, and they can be maybe one of the first evaluators of some new SDN technology that can fill an M&A pipeline and fill a product gap. So, I mean, it's not entirely selfless, but the fact is it's creating a very strong focus for emerging technologies in Ottawa. And we think once we prove this hub within Ottawa, we'll be able to replicate this across Canada. So we envision similar hubs in Waterloo and Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal, and all of them leveraging this infrastructure to be able to collaborate and develop new technologies. And that's really what gets Canary excited, because we are a national enterprise. So quickly wrapping up, why did when Mark first said, why don't you come and talk to the group and talk about strategy and what Canary's doing? And I'm thinking, what could I tell a bunch of product management guys that they don't already know? But sometimes we kind of get maybe a little jaded in what we do day in and day out. We truly believe this is transformative stuff, that if you're developing a product strategy, you have to embrace this emerging wave of cloud, of Internet of Things, of big data and analytics, or you're going to get left behind. I was surprised to see that 85% of net new software development currently is cloud-based. I don't know what it was a couple of years ago, but my guess it was maybe 50. We're past the tipping point, and in a couple of years it'll be 100%. It really does provide, though, an opportunity for small Canadian companies to compete on a global basis and to get big quick. The other thing it does is this whole data-driven innovation trend is providing opportunities to kind of move up that data value chain. So going back to the slide about average revenue per employee, it's really important to harness the value of that data and to turn that data into information and knowledge and value. So anything that can impart analytics and turn data into a service is going to provide you a lot more revenue opportunity than providing a hardware platform or a basic piece of middleware or whatever. It really didn't address it specifically, but I am a strong believer in vertical market focus. Have used this in my entire career and found that if you focus on a customer's needs specifically within a vertical, understand what their pain points are, and drive applications that solve those, you can be very successful. March Networks was a very good example of a focus on on verticals and quickly dominating it in an industry that was entirely internationally driven, was extremely competitive, yet we found a way to differentiate ourselves, add value, and drive some pretty good profits for a while. I won't go into the rest of that. It was a long story. But if you can, going back to that, the applications in traditional sectors, I think there are tremendous sectors or opportunities in things like mining and oil and gas and agriculture, traditional things that folks in ICT might not have paid a lot of attention to. But because of the size and because of the importance to this country and global economy, I think there's big opportunities in applying ICT technologies to improve productivity. And kind of just a final word, it is a big world out there. We have a tendency in Canada to look south of the border and think that's the market. I think a lot of the trends we talked about tonight show that it's no longer the case, and that the real opportunities are a lot broader than that. So thanks very much for having me tonight. Really appreciate it.